The classroom was quiet. Students sat at their desks, waiting. The air felt thick, like before a storm. The teacher, a tall person with gray skin, stood at the front. His name was Professor Corvath. He was about to start the lesson on dangerous planets. Suddenly, the door slid open with a sharp hiss. Everyone turned to look. A young man stood there. He was late. He walked into the room. His steps were not loud, but they felt heavy. He moved like he owned the place. This was Daniel Carter. He was human. Humans came from Earth, a place others called a death world. It meant Earth was very dangerous, full of predators, poisonous things, and wild weather. Because of this, humans were strong, tough, and scary to others. They were rarely seen at the big space school, Orion Prime Academy. Daniel walked to an empty seat near the back. The student next to him was a girl with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Her name was Chloe. She looked nervous. When Daniel pulled out his chair, the metal legs scraped loudly on the floor. Chloe jumped a little in her seat. Daniel sat down without looking at her. He just put his bag on the floor. The whole room was silent now. You could hear the soft hum of the lights. Everyone watched Daniel. Some students looked afraid. Others looked curious. A few looked like they didn't want him there at all. Humans had a reputation. People said they were violent. People said they were killers. Professor Corvath cleared his throat. His voice was smooth, but firm. "You are late, Mr. Carter. Orion Prime Academy values punctuality. Explain yourself." Daniel looked up at the teacher. He didn't seem worried or sorry. He had a calm face. "Traffic was hell," he said simply. His voice was normal, but it sounded loud in the quiet room. A ripple went through the class. Soft gasps. A few whispers. Someone shifted in their seat. Traffic was hell? Did he mean actual traffic? Or was it some human saying for a fight? Nobody knew for sure. Seeing a human up close was strange enough. Hearing him speak so casually was shocking. Professor Corvath's gray skin seemed to tighten around his eyes. He wasn't used to students being so bold. "See that it does not happen again, Mr. Carter," he said sternly. "Lateness disrupts the learning environment." Daniel just nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize again. He just opened his tablet, ready for the lesson. He acted like nothing unusual had happened. Like he hadn't just walked in and made everyone freeze. Professor Corvath tried to start the lesson again. He talked about planets with high gravity and toxic atmospheres, but it was hard for the class to focus. Eyes kept drifting back to Daniel. Chloe kept glancing sideways at him, then quickly looking away. She noticed how his hands looked strong. She noticed how he sat perfectly still, yet seemed ready to move fast. Daniel ignored the stares. He looked at his tablet, taking notes. He seemed relaxed, but there was something about him. A feeling, like a large, quiet animal resting in the sun. You knew it could be dangerous if it decided to move. The tension in the room didn't go away. It hung there, thick and heavy. The killer had walked into class, the human Deathworlder. And without doing anything more than sitting down and saying a few words, he had already left everyone feeling uneasy, speechless. They watched him, wondering what would happen next, wondering what a human was really like. The lesson continued, but nobody was really listening to the professor anymore. All their attention was on the quiet young man at the back. The classroom felt different after Daniel arrived. Professor Corvath continued his lesson about dangerous planets and the creatures that lived on them. He talked about predators, animals that hunt and kill other animals for food, showed pictures on the big screen, sharp teeth, claws, and fast-moving hunters. Survival on such worlds requires specific adaptations, Corvath explained. Speed, camouflage, venom, or overwhelming strength. A student near the front raised his hand. He had bright orange skin that seemed to ripple slightly when he moved. His name was Jake. He was known for being loud and confident, often trying to impress others. "Yes, Jake?" Corvath asked. Professor Jake began, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "You mentioned these adaptations are necessary for survival against predators, but what about species that are the predators?" He paused, then turned slightly in his seat. His eyes flicked towards the back of the room, like humans. Aren't they just ... glorified apes? What's so special about them besides being violent? A soft murmur went through the class. Many students shifted nervously in their seats. Chloe, the girl sitting next to Daniel, held her breath. She didn't dare look at him. Professor Corvath frowned. Humans are classified as apex predators, originating from a Class 12 death world, Jake. Their physiological and psychological resilience is well documented, though rare to witness firsthand. It is not merely about violence, but about extreme adaptability and endurance. Jake snorted, a dismissive sound. Clearly wasn't satisfied. Looking directly at Daniel now. Endurance, adaptability. Sounds like fancy words to cover up being primitive. I mean, look at him. He walks in late, disrupts the class, acts like he owns the place. Jake's voice grew louder, more challenging. I bet he couldn't even survive a single round of the Void Maw trials. Not a real one. Not against actual warriors. The classroom went utterly silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to vanish. Everyone knew about the Void Maw trials. It was a brutal training course, a deadly obstacle race designed to test the absolute limits of the toughest species. Students didn't volunteer for it. Warriors trained for years to attempt it. It was practically a death sentence for the unprepared. Professor Corvath's gray skin paled. Jake, that is entirely inappropriate. The Void Maw trials are, before Corvath could finish, a calm voice cut through the tension, came from the back. Name the time. Every head snapped towards Daniel Carter. He hadn't moved much. He was still sitting back in his chair, his posture relaxed. But his eyes were fixed on Jake. They were steady, focused, like two dark stones. There was no anger on his face, just a cool, quiet intensity. Jake blinked. He hadn't expected an answer, especially not that one. What? He stammered. You said I couldn't survive the Void Maw trials, Daniel repeated, his voice even quieter than before, yet it filled the room. So, name the time. When do you want me to prove you're wrong? Gasps echoed around the room. Chloe stared at Daniel, her large eyes wide with disbelief. Jake's orange skin flushed a deeper, darker shade. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking suddenly less sure of himself. He hadn't meant it as a real challenge. He was just trying to show off, to make the human look weak. Professor Corvath stepped forward, his expression stern. Mr. Carter. This is not Daniel interrupted, still looking only at Jake. Well, are you setting the time, or are you just talking? There was no mockery in his tone, just a simple, direct question. It was more unsettling than shouting. Jake swallowed hard. The whole class was watching him now, waiting. He couldn't back down without looking foolish. Tomorrow, he blurted out. The main arena, noon cycle. His voice lacked its earlier confidence. A ripple of shock went through the students. Someone whispered, "He's going to die." Daniel simply nodded, a single, slow dip of his head. Tomorrow, noon. He turned his attention back to his tablet, as if the matter was settled, as if he hadn't just agreed to face a challenge that terrified everyone else. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. The killer hadn't moved from his seat. He hadn't raised his voice. But with a few quiet words, he had done something far more shocking than walking in late. He had accepted a death sentence to prove a point, and he looked completely unafraid. Everyone, even Jake, was left utterly speechless. The human Deathworlder wasn't just unsettling, it was incomprehensible. The main arena buzzed like a giant hive. Every seat was filled. Students, teachers, and important guests packed the stands. The air crackled with nervous excitement. High above, in a special viewing box, sat a woman in a sharp gray suit. Her name was Evelyn. She watched the arena floor with serious eyes. She was an important leader for the humans. She did not look pleased. Down below, Jake stood near the entrance to the obstacle course. He smirked, talking loudly with his friends. He pointed towards the other end of the arena. Daniel Carter stood there alone, wore simple, sturdy clothes, not fancy armor like others might use. He looked calm, stretched his arms, ignoring the thousands of eyes watching him. The arena announcer's voice boomed out. "Contestant ready? Begin the Void Maw trials." A loud horn sounded. Huge metal doors slid open on the arena floor, revealing darkness. Daniel walked forward without hesitation and disappeared inside. Giant screens around the arena lit up, showing what was happening within the course. The first section was chaos. The gravity vanished. Daniel floated helplessly in a large, dark room. Sharp metal spikes jutted from the walls, floor, and ceiling. Then, for floating drones zoomed out of hidden slots. They had spinning blades attached. They shot towards Daniel, trying to cut him. The crowd gasped. Jake laughed. He's finished already. But Daniel didn't panic. He saw a small thruster pack attached to the wall nearby, meant for smaller, lighter species. He kicked hard off a spike, launching himself towards it. He grabbed the pack, ripping it from its mount with a grunt. He strapped it roughly onto his back, just as a drone sliced past his shoulder, tearing his shirt but missing his skin. Daniel hit the thrusters. He didn't fly smoothly. He shot across the room like a thrown rock, crashing hard into one drone, smashing it against the wall. He used the rebound to slam into another. Broken metal pieces floated around him. The other two drones tried to circle him, but Daniel used the thrusters in short, brutal bursts, smashing them against the spikes. The zero-gravity section ended. Daniel dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. He ripped the thruster pack off and threw it aside. He walked on. The next door opened into thick green mist. A terrible smell filled the arena, even through the screens. "Acid mist," someone yelled. It was supposed to burn skin, blind eyes. Daniel pulled his shirt collar up over his nose and mouth. He crouched low, almost crawling. His eyes watered, and his exposed skin turned red. He moved fast, but carefully, staying near the ground where the mist was thinner. He found a vent blowing clean air and paused for only a second, taking deep breaths, his eyes squeezed shut against the sting. Then he pushed on, disappearing deeper into the green fog. The crowd was silent now, watching. He emerged from the mist into a large cave filled with glowing purple crystals. The exit was on the other side. Suddenly, a massive shape detached from the shadows near the ceiling. It landed in front of Daniel with a ground-shaking thud. It was a beast, easily 3 times his size. It had thick gray hide like rock, 6 legs with claws like knives, and a mouth full of long, jagged fangs. It roared, a sound that vibrated in the chests of everyone watching. Jake cheered. Yes, the crystal shredder. Tear him apart. The beast charged. Daniel didn't run. He stood his ground. As the beast lunged, jaws wide, Daniel sidestepped with surprising speed. He grabbed one of the long fangs in the beast's lower jaw with both hands. The beast shook its massive head, trying to throw him off. Daniel held on, his boots sliding on the crystal floor. With a roar of his own that sounded raw and fierce, Daniel twisted his whole body, putting all his strength into it. There was a horrible, loud crack. The giant fang snapped off in Daniel's hands. The beast screamed in pain and rage. It stumbled back, dark liquid dripping from its broken jaw. Daniel held the huge fang like a club. He didn't attack. He just stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from small cuts on his face and arms. The acid burns red on his skin, the broken fang clutched in his fists. He stared at the wounded beast. The beast hesitated, its remaining fangs bared, but it didn't charge again. It let out a low, pained whine and backed away into the shadows. Daniel lowered the fang. He didn't look at the cameras. He just walked towards the exit door. It slid open, revealing the bright lights of the arena floor and the stunned, silent crowd. He stepped out. He was covered in grime, blood, and acid burns. His clothes were torn. He still held the massive, broken beast fang. He dropped it on the arena floor with a heavy clatter. The sound echoed in the absolute quiet. He looked up, scanning the crowd. Then his gaze found the VIP box. He gave a small, tired nod towards Evelyn. No one moved. No one spoke. One cheered. Thousands of beings sat frozen, staring at the human who had walked into the deadly void maw trials and walked back out. He wasn't just alive. It fought the impossible course on its own terms, using strength, speed, and terrifyingly simple. Brutal tactics no one else would have even thought of. The killer had walked into the arena. Now he stood before them, breathing hard, battered but unbroken. The human Deathworlder had done the impossible. The silence was complete. Everyone was utterly, completely speechless. The silence in the arena was heavy, like a thick blanket smothering all sound. Thousands of beings stared at Daniel Carter. He stood alone in the bright lights of the arena floor. He was breathing hard. His clothes were torn and dirty. Red acid burns showed on his arms and face. Blood trickled from small cuts. He looked exhausted, battered, but he was standing. He was alive. He bent down slowly, placed the huge broken beast fang he had been carrying onto the metal floor. It landed with a loud, echoing clang. The sound seemed to break the spell holding the crowd. Then noise erupted. It wasn't cheering at first. It was a wave of gasps, shouts, and disbelieving murmurs that grew louder and louder. People pointed at the screen showing replay images. Daniel smashing drones, crawling through acid mist, breaking the beast's fang, the impossible things he had done. Slowly, the murmurs turned into something else. Applause. It started in one corner, then spread like fire until the whole arena was thundering with the sound of thousands of hands clapping, stomping, or making other sounds of approval. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked around, his face calm but tired. Wiped some blood from his cheek with the back of his hand. Near the entrance, Jake stood frozen. His bright orange skin had turned pale. His mouth hung open. His friends weren't laughing anymore. They stared at Daniel like everyone else. Jake looked sick. He had expected Daniel to fail, to die. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the human to become a hero. Daniel glanced towards Jake. He didn't glare or smirk. He just looked at him for a second, then looked away. It wasn't anger, it was indifference. It somehow felt worse to Jake than hatred. Medical staff rushed onto the arena floor. They carried equipment and stretchers. They hurried towards Daniel, their faces concerned. Daniel held up a hand. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was rough but clear. The medical team stopped, confused. They looked at his burns and cuts. "Just scratches," Daniel added. He started walking towards the exit tunnel, ignoring the medical team completely. The crowd's applause followed him. As he reached the tunnel entrance, a figure stepped out to meet him. It was Evelyn, the important human leader from the viewing box. She wore her sharp gray suit. Her expression was serious, her eyes sharp. She looked Daniel up and down, taking in his injuries, his torn clothes, the dirt and blood. "You could have died," Evelyn said. Her voice was quiet but firm. It wasn't a question, it was a statement.
Oh.
She sounded almost angry. Daniel stopped walking. He met her gaze. He didn't look away, just shrugged his shoulders, a small movement. "Worth it," he said simply. He didn't explain. He didn't say what made it worth it. He just stood there, breathing heavily, waiting. The noise of the crowd was a distant roar behind them. Evelyn studied his face for a long moment. She saw the exhaustion, the pain, but also the stubborn calm. She didn't smile, but her expression softened slightly. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She stepped aside. Daniel walked past her into the tunnel, disappearing from the crowd's view. Back in the arena, Professor Korvath stood near the arena announcer's booth. His gray skin was tight with shock, but his mind was racing. He watched the replays still showing on the big screens. Thought about Daniel's actions. Using the thruster pack as a weapon, finding the clean air vent, breaking the fang. Thought about the human's incredible endurance. Korvath picked up the communication device. His voice, usually so smooth, sounded rough with emotion as it echoed through the arena. "Students, faculty, what we have witnessed today, changes things." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "We study dangerous worlds. We study survival. Thought we understood. We did not." He pointed towards the tunnel where Daniel had vanished. "Effective immediately, I am adding a new mandatory course to the curriculum, Human Survival Tactics. We have much to learn." A new wave of murmurs went through the crowd. Mandatory? Learn from humans? Near her seat, Chloe, the girl with pale blue skin, finally found her voice. She had flinched when Daniel first sat next to her. Now she felt something completely different. She saw Daniel walking away, tired but strong. She saw the broken fang still lying on the arena floor. She saw the stunned look on Jake's face. She saw the respect on Professor Korvath's. "How?" she whispered, mostly to herself. "How are you even real?" She wasn't afraid anymore. She was amazed. The killer had walked into their class. The human Deathworlder had walked into the arena. Now, he had walked out again, leaving everyone not just speechless, but changed. He had shown them something they didn't understand, something powerful, something uniquely, terrifyingly human. and Chloe wanted to understand it. The next day, the main lecture hall was packed again. Students filled every seat, whispering nervously. The air felt electric. Professor Korvath stood at the front looking different, less sure, more thoughtful. He cleared his throat. The whispers stopped. "Before we begin," Korvath said, his voice quieter than usual, "we have a guest speaker, someone who wishes to address yesterday's events." He gestured towards the side door. Evelyn walked in. She wore her sharp gray suit. Her steps were measured and calm. She walked to the center of the stage. Everyone watched her. She was the human leader. She looked powerful but not threatening. Her eyes swept over the silent room. "You watched Daniel Carter yesterday?" Evelyn began. Her voice was clear and carried easily. "You saw him endure the Void Maw trials. You saw his strength, his pain, his refusal to quit. Many of you looked at him and saw a killer. You saw only the violence of his home world." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Earth is a death world. It is true. Gravity is strong. Weather is violent. Predators are many. Disease is common. The planet itself seems to try and kill its inhabitants every single day." A ripple of unease went through the room. Chloe listened intently, her large eyes fixed on Evelyn. "But humans," Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger, "we do not conquer that world. We do not rule it through terror. We endure it. We survive it, day after day, year after year, century after century. That endurance is our strength. That resilience is our nature. We adapt. We persist. We protect each other. That is what Daniel showed you, not a killer, a survivor." Silence filled the hall. Her words were simple, but heavy. They painted a picture very different from the fear the students had felt. Korvath nodded slowly, his gray face thoughtful. Evelyn looked directly at the students. "You feared humans because you saw only the danger of our world reflected in us. Now perhaps you see something else. Not monsters, but beings forged in fire. We ask not for your fear, but for your understanding." She gave a small nod. "Thank you." She walked off the stage, leaving behind a profound quiet. Later that day, Daniel walked into the xenobiology classroom. He looked much better. Clean clothes. The acid burns were healing. He moved easily. The chatter died instantly. Every head turned. But it wasn't fear in their eyes now. It was something else. Curiosity. Respect. Daniel walked to his usual seat at the back. Chloe sat beside him. She didn't flinch this time. She watched him sit down. He opened his tablet just like before. He seemed the same quiet young man, yet everything felt different. He wasn't the scary outsider anymore. It was Daniel Carter, the human who survived the Void Maw trials. Professor Korvath began the new lesson. Human survival tactics. Endurance and adaptation. He started talking about Earth's environment, its storms, its mountains, its oceans. The class listened with intense focus. They looked at Daniel differently now. They saw the survivor Evelyn had spoken of. Near the end of the class, Jake stood up. His orange skin was flushed. He looked nervous. He walked slowly towards the back of the room. Everyone watched him. He stopped in front of Daniel's desk. Daniel looked up, his expression calm, waiting. Jake swallowed hard, held out his hand. It shook slightly. "Daniel," he said, his voice thick. I was wrong. About you. About humans. What you did was ... incredible." He struggled for words. "I apologize." The room held its breath. Daniel looked at Jake's outstretched hand for a moment. Then he stood up. He reached out and took Jake's hand in his. Daniel's grip was firm, strong. Jake winced slightly as Daniel squeezed his hand. Just a little harder than necessary, but not enough to hurt badly. It was a reminder, a human reminder. Daniel held Jake's hand for a second longer. A faint, almost invisible smile touched Daniel's lips. "Still think we're just apes?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear in the silent room. Jake managed a weak smile, shaking his head quickly. "No," he breathed. "No, I don't." Daniel released Jake's hand. He gave a small nod. Jake nodded back, relief washing over his face, and returned to his seat. Daniel sat down again. The class remained silent. Chloe looked at Daniel, then at Jake, then back at Daniel. She saw the quiet strength, She saw the simple acceptance of the challenge, the pain, the apology. She saw the survivor. Professor Korvath resumed his lecture, but the students weren't just listening to facts now. They were looking at a living lesson. The killer had walked into class. Human Deathworlder had faced their worst challenge. He hadn't just survived. He had changed everything. He hadn't made them speechless with fear this time. He had made them speechless with understanding. The galaxy had feared creatures from death worlds. Now standing before them was proof of what such a world truly created. Not monsters, but the ultimate survivors. And finally, they understood.